Let me share something unsettling, something most people avoid facing. The narcissist in your life isn't powerful because of confidence. They seem powerful because the wrong question has been asked. You've been bargaining, justifying, soothing, believing that logic, calm compassion, or patience will finally get through. It won't. And holding on to that belief is draining your time, your energy, and your grip on reality. So let's begin with something painfully direct, because only honesty can bring structure out of confusion. Narcissism does not fall apart when criticized. It doesn't crumble under insults, and emotional begging won't touch it either. What breaks it is accountability. This isn't a moral judgment. It's a psychological fact. Done. The narcissistic framework is like a hall of mirrors. Everything is reflection, distortion, image control. The moment something solid enters that space, something factual, something that can't be twisted or emotionally reframed, the whole construction begins to tremble. Now, pause and think about your own life. Think of the person who sucks the vitality out of every space they enter. The one who is never at fault, never accountable, always wronged, always misunderstood. You try to explain yourself calmly. You provide proof. You appeal to fairness. And what happens? Nothing. Or worse, you become the problem. That's because you're playing by the wrong rules. You assume the narcissist operates in the realm of truth. They don't. They operate in a realm of power without responsibility. Accountability is something else entirely. It's reality knocking loudly. It's the expectation that words and actions match over time. It's requiring someone to stay still long enough to be measured against their own claims. And that is exactly what a narcissist cannot endure, because they don't have a stable inner core. They have an image, not a self. And images collapse when asked to carry weight. Picture someone who constantly proclaims loyalty, integrity, moral superiority. As long as those claims float freely, they sound convincing. But the moment you calmly say without anger, then explain this specific action at this specific moment and take responsibility for the result, everything shifts. You'll see annoyance, evasion, sarcasm, sudden emotional explosions, or cold withdrawal. That reaction isn't strength. It's structural failure. It's like asking a cardboard bridge to support a truck. When it collapses, it reveals exactly what it was made of. Accountability is weight. Truth has substance. And narcissism only survives where nothing weighs anything. Where nothing is recorded, nothing is remembered. Nothing is followed through. That's why narcissists flourish in disorder. Chaos gives them endless exits. You might be thinking, I don't want conflict, I just want peace. That instinct makes sense. But here's the contradiction. Avoiding accountability doesn't create peace. It creates a constant low-grade misery where you're always explaining yourself, always questioning your memory, always wondering if you're the unreasonable one. Accountability feels risky in the moment, but it's the only path to lasting peace. Consider a workplace. A narcissistic manager claims credit for wins and dumps blame for losses. Everyone sees it, but no one names it. Why? Because naming it would demand accountability, clear roles, clear standards, clear consequences. So the dysfunction persists, not because the narcissist is powerful, but because others refuse to carry the weight of truth. Responsibility is heavy. Most people drop it. Narcissists never pick it up at all. Lands. Here's the part you really need to hear. Narcissists don't fear emotional exposure. They fear being pinned down by facts. They fear consistency over time. They fear documentation, patterns, follow-through. They fear the quiet statement delivered without fury or explanation. You said this. You did that. These were the results. What are you going to do now? That sentence clears the fog. And in clear air, narcissism can't breathe. Loom. Accountability isn't punishment. It's orientation. It's stating, this is where we are in reality. And reality cannot be bargained with. That's why narcissists will do anything to steer conversations back to feelings. Interpretations, intentions, tone, anything except behavior and outcomes, because behavior and outcomes are the one stage where they can't perform forever. So if you take one thing from this, let it be this. You don't overcome narcissism by being louder, sharper, or more virtuous. You overcome it by refusing to engage in unreality, by calmly demanding responsibility, by staying grounded when they try to drag you into emotional quicksand. That takes courage. It takes self-respect. It requires tolerating the discomfort of truth. But the reward is enormous, because the moment you stand on accountability, the dynamic shifts. Either the narcissist adapts, rare but possible, or they withdraw, attack, or vanish. In every case, clarity appears, and clarity is the base of a life worth living. Munda understand this carefully because this is where many people make a crucial error and then blame themselves for what follows. When you ask the right question, the one that exposes a narcissist, you are not stripping away their power. You are removing the mask, and those are not the same thing. Power is real. Masks are performances. Confusing the two is how people end up stunned, wounded, and disoriented when the truth finally comes into view. Most people go through life believing that if they simply tell the truth, if they phrase it just right, the narcissist will finally be break down, apologize, become reasonable, or at least withdraw in embarrassment. That belief is a fantasy, and it's a dangerous one. What actually happens is far more instructive. The question doesn't weaken them. It clarifies them. It reveals exactly the kind of power you're dealing with. Stripped of charm, stripped of storyline, stripped of the carefully manufactured identity they've been presenting to the world. Think of it this way. Imagine watching a magician perform on stage. The tricks are mesmerizing. You're impressed. You lean in. Then someone switches on the backstage lights and shows you the wires, the mirrors, the hidden doors. The magician doesn't lose the ability to move. He doesn't disappear. He doesn't collapse. But the illusion is gone. You can never experience the performance the same way again. That's what the question does. It doesn't destroy the narcissist. It dismantles your illusion. And that's frightening because illusions are comfortable. Illusions allow you to believe the chaos has meaning, that the cruelty has a reason, that if you just try harder, explain better, love more, everything will eventually make sense. The right question takes that. Suddenly, you're no longer dealing with a tragic figure or a wounded inner child. You're dealing with a behavioral pattern, cold, repeatable, consistent, across time. Consider a real situation. You ask a narcissistic partner a simple, grounded question, not an accusation, not an emotional appeal, just a question that requires their words to match their actions. And what happens? You don't get reflection. You don't get responsibility. You get anger, ridicule, deflection, or an abrupt attempt to seize control of the conversation. That moment is not weakness. That moment is exposure. You're seeing the operating system, not the polished interface. Lens people often say, they got worse after I asked that quest. Ation. Of course they did. You didn't take away their power. You removed their costume. And power without a costume is disturbing. It's the realization that you're not debating someone who wants understanding, but someone who wants dominance. That's not a failure of the question. That's proof it worked. This is where precision matters. The objective is not to embarrass the narcissist. The objective is not to win. The objective is to locate yourself in reality, because once you see clearly, you can make adult choices. You can draw boundaries. You can stop over-explaining. You can stop bargaining with someone who is never negotiating honestly. When the mask drops, they don't become less dangerous. They become easier to read. Think of a predator in the wild. The danger isn't its existence. The danger is not knowing where it is or what it is. Once it's visible, you can respond appropriately. Distance protection strategy. That's what clarity provides. And clarity is the real gift of the question. Whether you like the answer or not banned at this stage, many people feel guilt. They say, I provoked them. I made it worse. No, you exposed what was already present. The storm didn't begin because you noticed the clouds. You simply stopped pretending the sky was clear. That guilt is leftover manipulation. The belief that truth itself is aggression. It isn't. It's orientation. It's how you determine where you're standing. Here's the deeper layer. The one people struggle with most. When the mask falls and the power remains, you're forced to confront your own role. Not in creating their behavior, but in tolerating it. That realization hurts because it removes the excuse of ignorance. You know now, and knowing requires action, even if that action is emotional disengagement, internal distance, or refusing to participate in pointless conflict. The question is not a weapon. It's a mess, error. And once you've seen what's reflected, you can't return to innocence. That's the cost of truth. But it's also the source of strength. From that point on, you're no longer confused. You're no longer guessing. You're no longer trapped in interpretation. You're standing in reality. And reality, while often harsh, is stable enough to build a life on. But there is a mistake people repeatedly make when dealing with narcissistic personalities. And it's subtle, which makes it dangerous. They focus on what is said instead of what is avoided. They listen to the story, the explanation, the emotional display, and they miss the most important signal of all, evasion. Because evasion is not confusion. It's not forgetfulness. It's not complexity. Evasion is a choice. And that choice is the confession. When someone is asked a clear, grounded question and refuses to answer it directly, something significant has already occurred. You've reached the edge of truth, and instead of crossing it, they've stepped sideways. That sideways movement tells you more than 1,000 dramatic speeches ever could. Truth moves forward. Deception circles, that's how you tell them apart. Think about this in everyday life. You ask a simple workplace question. Who approved this decision? Not hostile, just factual. And suddenly the space fills with noise, context, stress, stories, jokes, irritation, a counterattack on your tone. Everything except an answer that isn't accidental. It's an escape maneuver. And escape maneuvers exist for only one reason. And there's something on the other side of that question they don't want you to see. People often say maybe they didn't understand the question, but listen closely. Narcissists understand questions perfectly well. In fact, they're highly attuned to them because a genuine question compresses space. It removes vagueness. It forces a stance. And taking a stance, creates exposure. Once you take a position, you can be assessed. You can be held to it later. And that is exactly what narcissism cannot endure. Evasion is not a sign of low intelligence. It's an excess of strategy. It's the automatic response of someone whose inner framework cannot survive examination. Think of it like a shell game. As long as the cups keep moving, you can't follow the ball. The instant the motion stops, the truth is revealed. So the motion never stops. New subjects, new feelings, new emergencies, new accusations. Speed becomes the shield. Look at close relationships. You ask a partner a clear question about a broken commitment. No anger, no theatrics, just precision. And suddenly the conversation shifts to their difficult childhood, or to how you're overtly sensitive, or to why now isn't the right moment, or to how your question proves you don't truly care. That emotional detour isn't closeness, it's diversion. And once you recognize it, you can't unrecognize it. Blaine, here's what you must grasp. People who are telling the truth may hesitate, stumble, or feel uneasy, but they move toward the answer. They don't flee from it. Evasion is movement away. It's retreat dressed up as nuance. And when that retreat appears again and again across time and context, you're no longer dealing with confusion. You're dealing with character picture truth as a fixed coordinate on a map. An honest person might take a winding path, but the direction is visible. An evasive person has no direction, only motion. And motion without direction is chaos. Narcissists exist comfortably in that chaos because it shields them. It blurs memory. It dissolves accountability. It keeps others exhausted, disoriented, and doubting themselves. People often feel harsh for noticing this. They wonder, am I being unfair? Am I reading too much into it? But recognizing evasion is not agree. Cyan. It's perception. You're not assigning motives, you're observing behavior. And behavior is the most dependable indicator of truth. Evasion also exposes hierarchy. When someone refuses to answer a question, they are silently declaring, I am not answerable here. That is a power claim, not spoken, but enacted. And once you see it, the entire relationship reorganizes in your mind. You realize you are never in a mutual exchange. You are being managed. This is where it becomes personally difficult because once evasion registers as confession, confusion is no longer available to you. You know what you're dealing with. And knowledge brings responsibility. Responsibility to stop chasing answers that won't arrive. Responsibility to stop justifying yourself to someone who understands exactly what you're saying. Responsibility to decide how much access this person has to your time, your energy, your inner life. Truth doesn't shout, it doesn't perform, it stands still. And when someone refuses to stand still with it, that refusal is the message. You don't need to argue. You don't need to convince. You only need to observe the pattern because patterns don't lie. People do. Planned. Once you learn to read evasion accurately, the haze clears. Conversations become shorter. Confusion fades. You stop trying to extract sincerity from someone whose entire method is avoidance. And in that clarity, something powerful happens. You regain your balance. You stop circling. You'd stop pouring energy into bottomless exchanges. You step out of the maze, not because you found the exit, but because you finally realized it was built, so you never would. There's something deeply informative about emotional reactions, and most people misread them entirely. They assume emotion equals weakness, lack of control, or immaturity. That's not quite right. Emotion, especially sudden, excessive emotion, is a signal flare. It reveals exactly where the hierarchy sits, who believes they outrank whom, and which unspoken rule you just violated without realizing it. Lens. Here's the truth you need to understand. People don't react emotionally when they feel equal. They react emotionally when a hierarchy is threatened. When someone believes they're entitled to dominance, exemption, or authority, and that entitlement is questioned, the response is rarely calm. It's irritation, outrage, condescension, mockery, punishment, disguised as feeling. Think about an ordinary moment. You ask a neutral question, not an insult, not an attack, just one that implies equality. Why did you make that choice? Or can you explain this? And suddenly, the atmosphere shifts. The voice tightens, the body stiffens, the underlying message is unmistakable. You don't get to ask me that. That reaction has nothing to do with the question. It has everything to do with rank. Narcissistic personalities make this especially visible because they live inside unspoken hierarchies. They don't declare them. They enforce them emotionally. As long as you remain in your assigned role, agreeable, admiring, differential, things stay smooth. The moment you step out of position, the moment you speak as an equal, the emotional response explodes. That explosion isn't random, it's corrective. It's designed to push you back where they believe you belong. And people often excuse this by saying they just have anger problems. No, anger has direction. Anger has intent. In these situations, anger functions as a method of social control. It's a display of dominance. It says, I'm allowed to react, you're not allowed to question. Once you understand that, the confusion fades. You stop taking the reaction personally and start reading it as information. Look at how this appears in families. An adult child calmly sets a boundary. Nothing dramatic, just clarity. And the parent erupts, tears, rage, guilt, accusations of betrayal. Why? Because the hierarchy has shifted. The child is no longer acting like a subordinate. The emotional outburst is an attempt to restore the old order, not through dialogue, but through force. bland. Now consider the workplace. A narcissistic superior responds with ridicule or humiliation when a junior employee offers a reasonable alternative. The suggestion isn't the issue. The issue is the implied equality. The emotional response reveals the belief system. I speak, you listen. Once you see this, you realize the problem was never competence or communication. It was rank bland. Here's a metaphor that brings this into focus. Imagine walking across a frozen lake. Everything seems solid until you step somewhere you weren't meant to. The ice cracks, loud, sudden, alarming. That crack tells you exactly where the structure is fragile. Emotional reactions are cracks in the ice. They show you where the narcissist's authority relies on unspoken rules and unquestioned assumptions. And here's the part most people struggle with. You didn't create the hierarchy, you exposed it. That's why guilt follows. People think, if I hadn't said that, things would be fine. Yes, things would be quiet. But quiet is not the same as healthy. Silence is often just submission dressed up as peace. Peace. Healthy relationships can tolerate questions. They can tolerate disagreement. They can tolerate curiosity. When those things trigger emotional punishment, you are not in a relationship of mutual respect. You are inside a dominant structure, and emotional volatility is how it's enforced. Pay close attention to which emotions are permitted. Are you allowed to be upset, to be disappointed, to say no, or do those emotions provoke backlash? Meanwhile, their emotions control the entire atmosphere. That imbalance tells you everything. Emotions reveal hierarchy because they show whose inner world is treated as more important the moment you understand what's happening. An internal shift occurs. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start asking, "What rule did I just break?" And the answer is usually the same. You behaved like an equal in a system that depends on your submission. This doesn't mean you escalate or attack. It means you stop being naive. You stop interpreting emotional reactions as honesty. You read them as structure. You recognize the hierarchy for what it is. And once you see it clearly, you get to decide whether you're willing to live inside it. And here's the final truth. Emotional reactions don't just reveal who someone is. They reveal what they believe you are. And once you grasp that, confusion is replaced with information, and informed people can choose where they stand, where they step back, and where they refuse to kneel. Planned clarity is the narcissist's greatest threat. That's not a slogan. It's a structural reality of how these personalities function. Confusion is their natural environment. Ambiguity is their camouflage. The moment things become clear, precise, named, tracked, remembered, the ground beneath them hardens, and they can no longer maneuver the way they once did. Well, narcissists don't dominate through strength in the traditional sense. They dominate through fog, through mixed signals, emotional noise, and endless reinterpretations of events. If nothing is clear, nothing can be challenged. If nothing is challenged, nothing can be corrected. And if nothing is corrected, they remain exactly where they are, untouched, unaccountable, and seemingly untouchable. Blank sentence. Think about how this shows up in your own life. You leave conversations exhausted, not because anything explosive occurred, but because nothing set. Told, nothing resolved. Promises were hinted at, but never stated. Boundaries were discussed, but never honored. Everything stayed just vague enough that later when you try to reference it, you're told you misunderstood. That isn't random. That's the system operating exactly as designed. Clarity is dangerous because it fixes reality in place. It turns impressions into statements, feelings into facts, stories into timelines. And narcissists despise timelines. Timlines, remember, Timlines reveal patterns. Patterns destroy. The moment you can calmly say, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, the illusion dissolves. Here's a metaphor that helps. Trying to deal with narcissistic interactions is like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. It slips away every time, but clarity is like turning on a fan in a closed room. Suddenly, the smoke moves in one direction. You can see where it's coming from. You can see where it's going. And once you can see it clearly, you can stop inhaling it. Many people believe that being precise will automatically escalate conflict. Sometimes it does briefly, but what it truly does is end confusion. And confusion is far more corrosive than conflict. Confusion erodes your confidence. It makes you question your memory. It teaches you to distrust your own perception. Over time, it fractures your sense of self. Clarity, by contrast, stabilizes. It gives you solid ground to stand on. Notice how narcissists respond when clarity appears. You write things down. You summarize conversations. You restate agreements. You ask for specifics, dates, actions, follow through, and suddenly you're labeled rigid, controlling, cold, obsessive, difficult. That reaction tells you everything. You haven't become worse. You've become harder to manipulate. Clarity strips away their ability to endlessly redefine reality. It shuts down move and go. Outposts. It stops the retroactive rewriting of history. When something is clear, it can be referenced. And reference is the enemy of manipulation. You can't gaslight someone who remembers accurately and refuses to abandon that memory. Think of a courtroom. Why do evidence, records, and transcripts matter? Because clarity prevents power from operating without restraint. Narcissists instinctively avoid anything that resembles a courtroom. They prefer improvisation. They prefer emotional appeals. They prefer private conversations with no witnesses and no notes. That's where they thrive in relationships. Bland clarity sounds almost dull. This is what I need. This is what I will accept. This is what will happen if it continues. No drama, no speeches, just structure. And structure is intolerable to someone who survives by slipping between definitions. They will test it. They will mock it. They will try to overwhelm it emotionally. But structure holds. Here's where courage is required. When you choose clarity, you lose your excuses. You can no longer say, I didn't know. You know, you've named it. You've seen the pattern, and now responsibility shifts to you. Not to change them, not to rescue them, but to decide how close you're willing to stand to someone who needs confusion to function. Bant clarity isn't cruelty. It isn't aggression. It's precision. It means saying exactly what you mean and meaning exactly what you say. It means not over-explaining. It means not justifying reality. It means allowing silence to do part of the work. And silence, when paired with clarity, is devastating to manipulation planned. You may notice something else as you begin living this way. The narcissist's grip on your emotions weakens. Their words lose their hypnotic pull. Their outrage starts to feel performative rather than terrifying. You stop reacting and start observing. And observati. On is the beginning of freedom. Clarity isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It's firm. It's consistent. It doesn't shift with the mood of the room. That's why it's such a threat. Narcissists can dominate chaos. They cannot dominate coherence. Coherence exposes them without attacking them. It simply refuses to bend. Here's the final challenge to sit with. Ask yourself where you've been avoiding clarity in the name of keeping the peace. Ask yourself where vagueness has felt safer than truth. Because every place you refuse to be clear is a place where someone else gets to define reality for you. Clarity isn't just a strategy for dealing with narcissists. It's a discipline for living. It's how you align your words with your actions and your actions with your values. And once you inhabit that space, manipulation loses its grip. There is nothing more threatening to someone who feeds on confusion than a person who sees clearly and refuses to look away. Lane. So let's bring this together. Not neatly, not comfortably. But honestly, what you've seen is that narcissism doesn't survive truth, yet it doesn't collapse theatrically either. It's exposed through accountability, revealed when the mask slips, confessed through evasion, mapped through emotional reactions, and ultimately neutralized by clarity. Not by rage, not by clever arguments, but by your refusal to live in confusion. That is the thread running through all of this. Reality properly perceived is stronger than manipulation. Lanced. Here is the part meant to unsettle you. Every narcissistic dynamic continues because someone is carrying more confusion than they should. That person is often you, not because you're weak, but because you're conscientious, empathetic, and willing to question yourself. Those are strengths, but unprotected strengths can be exploited the moment you step into clarity. The game changes, not because they become better, but because you mad. So sit with this question and don't answer it quickly. Where in your life are you tolerating confusion? Because clarity would force a decision you've been postponing. That's the real cost of seeing clearly. Once you see, you're responsible. You can't unsee it. You can't go back to calling it complicated when it's actually patterned, unmined. If this felt uncomfortably accurate, you're not alone. And that alone makes it worth discussing. Share what you've noticed, not to vent, but to articulate it. Because articulation is the beginning of order. And if you want to keep sharpening your perception, if you want more conversations like this that don't flatter you, but strengthen you, then subscribe. Clarity isn't a single realization. It's a practice. And once you practice it, life may not become easier, but it becomes real. And real is something you can build.